Good afternoon. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Brandon Maxim, and I'm a policy analyst here at XYZ University. I'm here to speak with you today about the results of a recent study we finished about increasing enrollment at XYZ University. This has been a challenge for our institution for some time now, so we're hoping that the results of this study will help to solve some of the enrollment challenges that we faced in recent years. One of the major concerns or problems that we've been facing at XYZ over the last few years is that too few prospective in-state students are enrolling at XYZ University. In order to begin to find ways to solve the problem, it was important to take a look at our institution to get a sense of how big of an issue this really was. We did that through both qualitative and quantitative measures. In our qualitative analysis, we found that the decline in enrollment is having an impact at all levels of the institution on students, faculty, and administration. For students, it was impacting the availability of classes and electives. As you know, students often will pick institutions based on very specific things. Lots of programs have very similar types of coursework. It's the electives, though, that can really be what students make final decisions on. And with a decline in enrollment, we found we were having to offer fewer electives because we just didn't have the demand. So the impact on students was starting to impact our enrollment, we believe. It was also impacting faculty. Anytime you try to condense offerings, it really starts to have an impact on what faculty are able to teach. It starts to impact morale as we start seeing less of a need for faculty, so we start holding back on full-time positions. We start maximizing resources, so faculty may not be teaching the classes that they really are excited and passionate about teaching. And it also impacts administration as well, as there's a lot of morale issues to contend with, and it impacts the way that the institution approaches topics like filling positions and the prioritization of resources. Looking at the issue from a quantitative perspective, we really started to see the impact of this challenge. Over the next 10 years, it's anticipated that there's going to be a 20% drop or more in high school graduation rates in the state of Michigan. This is according to Pavlik 2021. This is really going to impact our numbers because already we're seeing a decline in enrollment, but if we see an additional 20%, that really means it's going to be difficult for us as an institution to come back from this. So we need to find new innovative ways to approach the issue, and we can't just look at it as we have been in attacking it from the same perspectives that we've used in the past. Finally, there's a lot of concern now about the value of a college degree and career prospects. There's a lot of stuff in the media that's really attacked colleges in recent years, talking about devaluing college education and how the rise in minimum wage eliminates the need for a lot of students to go to college. We all know that those are challenges that are unfounded, but they're ones that also influence students and when it comes time to make those decisions about attending college. So overall, we found that both sides, the qualitative and the quantitative, both highlighted some real concerns, and it reinforced the fact that we needed to take another step in finding new ways to address this enrollment challenge. After identifying the scope of the problem, we really dug in to see what research we could find that would help us come up with alternatives that might work for X, Y, and Z. We did this through looking at what was happening in the community. We looked at what other similar types of schools were doing, and we also looked at national trends and how education has been evolving in the last few years to help guide us in our research. After an examination of what we were able to uncover, we found 3 different alternatives that we thought might make sense for our institution. Those 3 are adopting a customer service approach, conducting an enrollment study, and reducing tuition. The first option that we looked at was adopting a customer service approach. This option had several advantages. The first one is that it allowed us to engage directly with students. In the business world, this is what's happening more and more. A lot of the relationship building is focusing on the consumer and what can be done to improve that relationship with the students. This is important for recruiting purposes because if students build that relationship early on and they feel they have a better relationship with the institution, that's going to make them more likely to select X, Y, and Z. This is especially important now as there are thousands of schools competing for that same population of students, especially now that more and more schools are adopting online remote education formats, which allow them to broaden their reach for students. Also, it helps us to streamline the processes that we use for enrollment and to mitigate some of those barriers. In our enrollment process, we have lots of different checkpoints that could become problematic for students. So by looking at it from a customer service approach and retooling the way that we do things, we saw some opportunities that might allow us to make those barriers a little bit more manageable for students, which will be more likely to finish that process and go through and matriculate as students. With that said, we found some disadvantages in this side as well. Oftentimes for customer service approaches, there's a lot of time and training required with setting it up, which, in our current situation where we're trying to make changes as quickly and efficiently as possible, may not necessarily be the best for the institution. This model could potentially become outdated. We did find that this is the current trend that's happening frequently in the business world, but like most trends, there's a life cycle. So we know it's something that may not last long term. So this is one of the challenges that we found with this one. The other is it was a little bit more difficult when examining this model to project the impact that it would have on enrollment. We did find that it would lead to some increase in enrollment, but it was really challenging to figure out just what percentage might go through if we're able to reduce the barriers and improve those customer service relationships to tell how much of an impact that would have on our enrollment. We did find that most of the projections would estimate somewhere in the ballpark of a 2 to 3% increase in enrollment, but is it sustainable? Is it something we could do over a long period of time? Did we lowball the effort? It's just a little bit challenging based on the numbers because there's not a lot of schools that are doing this yet. So it was one of our considerations as we looked at this option. The second option we looked at was conducting an enrollment study. And we found that this had several advantages. It does allow us to dig in and do some targeted enrollment efforts. It allows us to maybe see if we can identify some gaps in our enrollment currently and do some outreach to find ways that we can reach that population and entice them to enroll at X, Y, and Z. And it also helps to ensure that our programs are meeting the needs of the community, which since the COVID-19 pandemic has really been a challenge for a lot of schools because we're finding that programs and the needs of the community have been changing so quickly. While there's a lot of advantages to this model, there are some disadvantages. One of the things that we found with schools that have done similar types of efforts is the schools that are looking for those gaps in enrollment are often aiming for the low-hanging fruit, the stuff that doesn't cost them a lot of money, that will have the biggest impact on enrollment. That works well in the short term, but the long-term implications is that oftentimes it leads to equity issues because the students that need more resources to be successful are the ones that often are not part of those enrollment efforts. So it does require some additional operating costs. We're talking about increasing maybe our dining services hours. We're talking about increasing bookstore hours, especially if we're looking at evening and weekend classes, extra tutoring resources. So there are some additional costs that come with this, and we need to make sure that our enrollment gains are offsetting those additional costs in order to make this process work. Also, like I said, it may also only provide some short-term gains because there's only so many different populations you can target. And then the well starts to run dry a little bit, or you get to a point where the extra expenditures is not going to give you the return on investment that you're looking for. The third option we looked at was lowering tuition. Now, this is obviously a great marketing tool because anytime you lower your tuition rates, it's going to get positive attention in the media and it's going to get parents' attention for sure. It also reduces the total cost of a degree, which helps to make education more accessible to students. It opens us up so that we can get more marginal students who may not be able to afford college, and it opens those doors for more students to have that opportunity to come to XYZ. There are some disadvantages. The biggest disadvantage kind of focuses around that short-term uncertainty. If we lower our tuition and neighboring schools see it, obviously they might make that similar decision to lower their rates. And there's only so many times you can do that because you don't want to get in a competitive war with your neighboring schools in order to keep lowering those rates. So this is probably a one-time opportunity. And if it's something that X, Y, and Z is the only school that does, it can have some long-term benefits, but there is that risk that the benefits may be more short-term than some of the other options we've looked at. The nice thing about it is there aren't a lot of schools in our area. However, we do need to make sure that if we lower tuition and we go with this option, that the reduction would put our tuition lower than the competing schools around us, which, based on our research, that will actually do for us, which is a really positive effort. So after reviewing the 3 different alternative options, we found one that made the most sense for X, Y, and Z, and that was the option to reduce tuition. Ultimately, we think that reducing tuition will have the least disruption to our institutional operations, as we don't have to hire new people, we don't have to extend hours in some of our programs and services, and it's not something that's going to take a long time to implement. So it's a change that can happen relatively quickly. It also reduces the total cost of education for students, which we know is a hot button debate in the community right now, and is really important for prospective students and parents who are trying to figure out how they're going to end up paying for college. So we think that this is an option that's going to really have the greatest impact for us. It's also the most equitable option, as it's not going to force us to make decisions that might unintentionally target specific groups of students and may not have everyone's equal opportunities in mind. Luke 14:28 reminds us, "For which of you, intending to build a tower, sitteth not down first and counteth the cost, whether we have sufficient to finish it?" When we talk about the cost of a college education, it's more and more on people's minds how much it's going to cost them in the long run, because we know that the cost of college is not getting any cheaper. And we also know that the benefits that are derived from attending college are harder to identify in some career fields than others. So that total cost really becomes an important factor. And we think that for these reasons, lowering tuition is by far the best of the 3 options for X, Y, and Z University. We think it's going to have a dramatic impact both in the short term. We also think there's that potential for it to carry it out over the long term as well, which should help to get us over the hump of the next 10 years, where we're projecting to see that steady decline in enrollment in the high schools in our region. So ultimately, we find that lowering our tuition rates is the best choice for X, Y, and Z, and we truly believe that in the end, it's going to have the greatest impact on our institution. So as we bring our presentation to a close, I just want to thank you all for your time, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for joining me today.